walking on some of the burials. So some of the burials are mounted, like this area here. Others are flat. So for a long time, it was thought that majority of burials are mounted. But we have found instances, and we'll walk up to that area just below the ridge, where we found non-mounted burials. So the entire space is a burial ground. We can't tell you if they left any markers. We've not found any evidence of that. They might have been at some point in time, but that's been lost over time. But we do have mounted burials like this.
So how do you guys actually know persons were buried here?
That came through excavation. So the gentleman who did the work, two researchers, Professor Handler, Professor Lyon, they were in Barbados in, I think, the late 70s, looking for enslaved villages and burial sites. And they couldn't find any. They happened to Newton where they saw an elderly gentleman, and they asked him questions if he happened to have known if there was a burial ground. And he said to them, in fact he did, that his grandmother and great-grandmother passed on that memory to him, that his ancestors were buried over in the plantation in this field, and he brought them here. So, we don't like to write. We tell stories. We keep our memories ordered. Right. And this is an instance where that oral memory proved to be true. So he gave them the information, they came to this field, and they began to excavate, and began to find the skeletal remains of our ancestors. And it's from those skeletal remains that we understand how people lived. In some cases, some people died, so there's a lot of lead content that was found. So a lot of people were malnourished because they being overworked, not given good food. But the lead content for a while comes down to the rations of ground that people were given because using lead pipes. So that lead got into the body, and if you have too much lead in your body, that causes problems. They've also noted that from some of the skeletal material, you can actually see how hard people were worked as well.
Okay.
So that was also there. And then in the late 90s, early 2000s, we've had other researchers who've taken some of that material and begun to do DNA testing to understand their places of origin.
Right.
And understand where they might have come from, which almost has a direct correlation to us now. People talk about DNA testing, can we find out who we are, where did we come from? And the answer is yes. I think the intriguing question that we might want to do in the next couple of years is to be able to locate the family members of the persons who are interred here. Where are they?
Right.
Because maybe the elderly gentleman that we mentioned before, that memory died with him, but there's an entire family up there that has no idea that their ancestors are here.
Yeah.
And that becomes really, really important.
So how do we find that out, or how can you see something like that happening?
That's going to take time and money, but I would like to think that maybe in the next 2 to 3 years, we can have a project that seeks to marry looking at what is ancient DNA, but bringing it into a project where the Barbadians to give the samples so that we can do that cross-matching. Maybe start in this church area, maybe St. Philip, get how Barbadians tend to migrate over time, finding out where the Kennedy village was for Newton, seeing if there's anyone who still lives there, where they know that the ancestors, the family plot, oh yeah, we once had this family plot in the last 100 years, okay, so you would have been a descendant of someone who's interred here.
Right.
Can we make that connection?
Okay.
But the other interesting thing about Newton is that we do have documentation. We're now sifting through it to try to get a better idea of the names of people who were buried here. We do know some, we don't know all. As I said, the state village is supposed to next at some point do some kind of investigation to understand how large that was. And even over here, because we're kind of put a moratorium on excavation, we started the project within in the next week, we will use ground penetrating radar to identify additional burials and probably begin to understand what is the actual size of this burial space. So those are some of the questions that we can still ask. Get that information. We're going to head up to the ridge so we can make the connection. You can see how the landscape has been laid out. Now, before we get to the ridge line, I want to point out this area over here. As happens seasonally, you get cane fires. And one year, there was a cane fire that burnt this entire burial space. And in this area here, we saw laying of what we would traditionally think of as a burial plot. You know, it had a perimeter, it had a space as though there was a gate leading in. And we were like, wow, imagine this was literally hidden under the grass. But because of that fire, the outline was revealed to us. So we already knew that people buried in family plots. What we didn't quite know is other family plots would ever be demarcated in some way, and we had evidence here that did occur.
Okay, so you guys took pictures.
Took pictures and measured it out, and yeah. It just adds another layer of humanity. Because again, when we say enslaved or slaves, the people almost lose a sense of identity. What sex like this do is it begins to allow us to recapture what that humanity was through a simple act of burial. Someone of the very means that they're looking. So let me ask you that question. Do you like history at school? Well, what we do with sex like this is seek to bring them alive. So we have a better understanding of what our history is. So this is great. So we're up on the ridge line. Those are ladies who haven't been here. To my south is the ABC Highway coming off of Newton Roundabout. Over to my left, east, in the area here where you see the Marvine Town trees, is where we believe the enslaved village would have been.
You call them the what?
Woman's Town. So these trees here,
Okay.
right, these are Woman's Town.
Okay.
So that area is where the enslaved village would have been. This is the burial space, not too far away. The factory, we believe, is where that chimney is. And the plantation house, that royal palm directly ahead is where the Newton estate house is located. So you get a sense of how the plantation is laid out. And of course, down the road is Oystings. So that's where the sugar and rum would be shipped from. No need to go to Bridgetown because we've got your own port.
Right.
We can even imagine that perhaps in some instances, some of the slave ships actually would have come to Oystings and brought people up as opposed to Bridgetown and then people being walked from town here.
Right.
Both scenarios could have played out. And this is a place that they had no idea where they were coming to. Plantation was established in 1660. So from 1660 to the end of slavery, 1838, families would have come here, worked, died, had their own families here, who would have done the same thing. And at every step, resisting. At every step, wanting freedom. And here we are. Descendants of people like that, not from this plantation, or maybe who knows, maybe we might be. Coming back to this space as free people. Coming back to this space where we now control our destiny, where we can pay homage to them, have a space to reconcile what is a traumatic past, and hopefully bring some healing to us, but also understand that this doesn't happen again. That's also yeah.
Understood. So how do you think they brought the dead here from their village? How did they transport them, so to speak, to the Barbados?
So they would have made their way from their slave village, walked over with their dead. We've looked down below where we've seen some mummied, but the excavations also show that there were some burials along this ridge line as well. So when we say the entire space, we talk about the entire space being used. And you would have had song, you would have had dance to commemorate the life of that person. That person would have been interred with great goods. It might have been something that was personal to them or personal to a family member that was buried. And the other interesting thing about Newton, at the time in the 70s when the excavation was done, there was this belief that enslaved people had nothing. And the material culture found with the enslaved people here showed that wasn't true.
Right.
People had diamonds, gold, silver, they had earrings, they had pendants.
Right.
So they were able, in what was a system meant to oppress them, meant to deny them any human agency, they were able at specific times to exert that human agency. And in fact, when you go to documented records, and you can plantation managers in the 18th century writing that, the particular slave walked off the plantation because they recognized that they had to let them walk off. They say they were missing for a few days, probably went to visit king folk at neighboring plantations or venturing to the rich around, and they came back bearing gifts. So again, it points to we're only beginning now to have a better understanding of enslavement, a better understanding of the agency of enslaved people.
Right. So they were allowed to leave this area and as you say, go to British Columbia.
Yes, I can't even say allowed, they walked off. They didn't ask permission, they just went.
Okay.
There's a case, very famous case, I'll take you to, there's a small plastic called Bulldog, which is part of the museum's writing series, talks about Bulldog. I was a matriarch there at the time, who got so fed up with the treatment of the plantation manager that she made her way and went to the owner of the plantation and complained that the manager was treating her and her family badly, and that person needed to be dismissed. And she was enslaved. I think some action is taken. What eventually happened is that she's able to manipulate her family. I think her daughter and her son.
Oh, did she get the England?
Literally, she got away. She clearly had enough money that she could find passage, take Mrs. St. Vincent, and then get it.
Okay.
Yeah. No restriction, remember all these things. But yeah, so we can walk the site across to this ridge line. But yeah. So I think the thing for us is to recognize that in a month like Heritage Month, it's especially important to pay attention to sites like these, recognize that they tell our history, and for persons to come and visit the site. And as I said, we're in the midst of doing some interpretation. We're having interpretation up here, along the ridge line, down below, and seeking for people. Because some Barbadians do come up on Emancipation Day and other days to pay their respects. And what they come to is, for them, an open field. What we want them to come to is an interpreted space where they can read information about their ancestors.
Right.
And have a space, a safe space in which to sit and come to terms with that history as well.
Right.
We think that's very, very important.
You mentioned earlier about different rituals, African rituals and stuff that they would have performed, or been a part of their like still like yes.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with any of them or?
Not intimately familiar, because unfortunately, a lot of what they did was never written down.
Okay.
But if you think about your singer, or Calypso, the way in which she writes songs, they would have brought some of that with them. And with interactions here developed in a particular way.
Right.
So in fact, there's a Barbados slave song, which is known to be the oldest slave song of its time, which was rediscovered in an archive maybe 5 or 6 years ago.
Okay.
And now it's now part of what is called in Memory of the World inscription. And we've had 1 or 2 local performers perform the song, and it is haunting. Because the European who heard it actually, because he was a musician, noted what the lyrics and the melody was and what the score and wrote it up.
Okay.
So you can, from his notes, actually perform the song the way that he heard it.
Okay.
But it's very haunting. The words and the lyrics is very
Do
haunting.
you know it? To sing?
Oh, I can't sing. I told that. My singing that Awaken the Dead.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I'll have to do my research.
But if you go to YouTube and you pull up Barbados Slave Song, it will pop up.
Okay.
Number 1688 Orchestra had performed at the museum on at least 2 occasions.
Ah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, and if you think about, okay, that's music. Dance. Some people believe that the Waka is part of a larger dance movement called the Joe and Johnny, which is Nobby for Waka.
Okay.
And then, of course, there's our food. So, how we, although many of us don't anymore, cook. Cuckoo and flying fish, cuckoo and salt fish. The mere fact that we use the word cuckoo, which is a derivative of fufu, which is to mash.
Okay.
So anything that is mashed is a cuckoo. So breadfruit cuckoo, meal cuckoo,
Right.
cassava cuckoo.
Never heard of that one.
Really?
Cassava cuckoo?
Cassava cuckoo.
Never.
Sweet potato cuckoo. Now, my grandmother used to, no, did she? No, my grandmother's mother used to do cassava and Barbados cuckoo. So if there's anybody out there, as a grandparent or great grandparent, and remember that, give us a call. Yes.
Sweet potato, cassava, and Barbados?
Cassava and Barbados
Okay. I'll
cuckoo.
try to remember that.
Because cuckoo just means mash.
Right.
So you mash anything, that's a cuckoo.
Okay.
It's like, for Bajans, anything hot is tea.
Right.
Cocoa tea, tea,
Right.
you know, coffee tea, everything is a tea.
Right.
But it is these people who brought their culinary skills with us. They weren't able to reproduce what they would have had at home, but they made adaptations.
Right.
And that some of that is what we eat today.
So how did they get the supplies and stuff?
So, well, it depends. Some supplies were bought on board ship, but over time, if you look at the plantation accounts, you can see that they're buying salted cod from Canada, they're importing rice from the Carolinas, which was settled from Barbados.
Okay.
They're bringing in cornmeal and millet, which we call guinea corn. Guinea corn is actually millet, which is sorghum, which we only use in jaja nowadays. For those who still eat jaja, many people don't.
Right.
But in a way, jaja is a complete meal, protein and carbohydrates together.
Right.
We only know how it once a year at Christmas. So some of the enslavers understood what were some of the culinary practices and sought to give foods that mimic that.
Okay.
And our ancestors adapted and created new foods of that, some of it has been passed down to us.
Right.
Even we believe the ability to manufacture alcohol, because they came from regions where palm wine would have been distilled. I believe that they would utilize some of that skill in turning molasses into rum.
Okay.
So there's this entire toolkit of survival and food ways and speech that they brought with them, some of which have been passed on. Like just now you said something that was truly Bajan.
What was that?
I still cook.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm a Bajan to the bone.
To the bone. There you go. And the words like what and joke.
Yeah.
And even how we say certain things, because the cast and the inflection is West African. If you wanna hear how we might have sounded in the 18th or 19th century, I would say listen to Barbadian from South Carolina.
Okay.
When you hear this speak, you're like, oh, I'm Bajan. I mean, yes, it's like American accent, but the tones and some of the words,
Right.
you're like, oh yeah, I can understand what that is.
Okay.
And this is what they're for. The way we dress, particular colors that we might like, even distilled down to the churches that we say we go to.
Right.
It's all coming out of that rich culture that even though there was an active decision to stamp it out, people kept. They masked it in certain ways and kept it, and it's been handed down to us. And it's for us now to recognize what that is and keep it alive.
Right.
Yeah. And it all starts in a space like this.
Intrigued by the information shared here today by Mr. Farmer. So much I was unaware of, so much to learn, and I know a lot of you guys are probably awed at some of the stuff that was said here today, but we gotta ask some questions, get to know our history, get to know where our people came from. Just so much knowledge, man. So stay tuned.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. That was the BDMI's interview with me at the Enslaved ground at Newton almost 3 years ago during COVID. No need to look at me. Spare my disembodied voice. I'm later. At this time, I'd like to introduce Ms. Michelle Hickson Cox, who is the art student at Barbados Community College, a PhD candidate at the University of Glasgow, looking into theatre's intersection with museums and education to form her poetry, simply entitled Newton.
Good evening. Good evening. Okay. So a little bit of context, what the work that I'm doing before I read the poetry. It's not much of a performance, it's more of a reading. I started working with the Barbados Museum Historical Society in 2014. It was my introduction to the whole idea of bringing theatre and history together. Now, I have to say I'm an imposter. I have never studied history at any level before. No tertiary level, nothing of the sort. So I came to this from very much an outsider's perspective. And I feel as though that perspective is really integral because those of us who sit here today, we are the ones who are interested in history and archaeology, and we're kind of preaching to be converted, right? But the question I'm asking is, how do we take this information and make it available to a wider audience, to especially a younger audience, people who are not necessarily studying history, and yet for them it is still very important to know about themselves. We can talk about questions of identity, questions of just understanding your ancestry, understanding the strength of character, the experiences that your ancestors would have encountered. And so I proposed to Glasgow that I wanted to do this PhD called Excavating the Silences. And it's called Excavating the Silences because I'm looking very specifically at the transatlantic slave trade in Barbados. And I'm looking at having a conversation, about what are the stories that were not told. The old African proverb, history is always told by the victors, the hunter that writes the story and not the lion. So I'm looking to see how can we now talk more about the other side of the coin. Let's talk more about our ancestors and bring their stories to life. And I'm going to be doing that through performance. I say theater, but I say theater in a very broad sense because I'm not restricting the theater to just conventional dialogue on stage. We're looking as well at poetry, we're looking at movement, we're looking at the range of the performative art forms that are possible and seeing how we can then use those forms to reach a wider audience. The poem we're going to read for you this evening was written based on one of my experiences going to Newton with the Barbados Museum Historical Society, and as Kevin quite rightly said, it's very simply called Newton. Solemnly serene, plantation landscape attempts to deceive, I attempt to breathe. Breath lying captive and twinned in drum beating chest, centuries old blood still soaks ground, feeding, growing, modernity. Sun burning back, bringing inherited memories of whips cracked, cracked skin, cracked bones, cracked souls. I pause, I breathe. A brisk breeze blows, stifling silence interrupted by whispered chatter of towering shack, speaking to me in ancestral tongues, the earth they walked beneath my feet. I seek shade, I seek shelter. I seek suspension of disbelief as vibrations of sacred space swallow me. Bared hands buried in delicate dirt, blush pain from beauty, ancestors whisper. Exhale I, exhume I, express I. Thank you.
Community Outreach Officer of the Barbados Museum Historical Society. Welcome once again to the theatre. The next part of our program this evening, I hope you will all enjoy. It is
A gust of wind pushes her feet where her fearful heart can't take them. She stands on the ridge, watching, waiting. A scream of terror rings out across the village. She remains in place, watching, waiting. Wait for me to the east, he said, where they lay the bodies of the dead. Watch for my son. Wait for me. I will come to you, my love. We will finally be free. So there she remained, watching, waiting. She closed her eyes and prayed to the gods. Her back throbbed from the work of the days gone. She listened to the music from the woman's tongue tree and prayed, Lord, don't let them screams be. And there she remained, watching, waiting. She wrestled with demons as morning threatened the skies, not a drop of sleep even darkening her eyes. Where he could be? Her thoughts began to run wild. I hope that white bitch ain't find out with me child. Heart racing, but watching, waiting. Another scream echoed, bouncing off the keys. This scream she knew. She could call it by name. She fell to her knees and took another swig of rum and cried, for now she knew her love would never come. Yet still she remained, watching, waiting. Days turned into nights, nights turned into days. 2 centuries of Newton, soul unscorched by the blaze. A lonely spirit, watching, waiting.
Nutmeg and vinegar, but I can be nothing but opium. So she drink it with little salt water, just before Master enter with the machete. Watch the eyes go wide, and I could tell she wasn't ready, see. Some call it slaughter. But Newton plantation raising cane sugar and rum, this ain't really the place to raise a son or daughter. But I knew she wouldn't take me up on my offer. Some call me she-devil, some call me witch doctor. My craft is somewhat of a conundrum. I don't cast spells. I use the earth to retain a connection with my ancestors. I was born with a sight and some call it possession, but my words simply converse with herbs for my own protection. Ain't no funerals for those of our complexion. We simply cast aside, same way our ancestors were tossed aboard, our souls too worn to cross their shores. But let me teach you a lesson, my love. Some say our souls pass on to the heavens above, but I, more than to be a woman or a witchcraft, I am the passageway for the darker ones, the middleman, making sure our transit isn't taken advantage of again. I don't ask for much, beyond a little trust. See, this ain't a sacrifice. This is a blessing in disguise. Most of we ain't gonna make it out of here alive. And isn't it a little better your child won't have too much pain to survive? See, this ain't magic, this is medicine. And I can't force you to drink them. But maybe coming from you, she would listen. Ain't make no sense visiting hell when his pure, sweet soul could just stay in heaven.
You mean to tell me my father was a free man? He must have blinked twice on this island before he landed on British soil. But one old dog like me, doing sweating and toiling like these hands didn't belong to this body. Don't get me wrong, I ain't trying to cause trouble for nobody. But you mean to tell me my mother was a free woman? They was married in 1758, and when Mrs. Judith passed away in 63, my family was free. What I know about freedom, all I know is that my skin don't got to burn in the sun for me to rest these old wounds in the great house like my son wife does do. What I know about freedom, let me tell you a thing or two. In 66, John Newton was up to eat the tricks and sent my mother back to bed like my father would have noticed. What I know about freedom? Hear this one. Newton landed himself a couple licks in his head. Ain't no whip or pine, but he finds himself in a court case, and with the risk of fine, he had to ship poor Mary back to British soil. So when you ask me what I know about freedom, well, to tell you the truth, I ain't know too much. But at the very minimum, I would think I got the right to do nothing every once in a while. You got a house on land in my being, but best believe I was born from a free woman. So who you think you call a slave? I just walk through the place with my hand on my hip. Call me Newton, if you please. Although I ain't there no hip. Beyond the pain along my spine, this pain is mine, and I got a right to be idle every once in a while. From the time these legs could move, some man was telling them what to do. So I born in work, I got to die in work too. So every afternoon we drop the old tools and drop the old pain like it don't exist till the next day. Some like to work in the garden plots for something market, hucksters with yam and sweet potato or whatever else the old slaves could pilfer without an arm. And the young boys just travel for miles just to see the smell of their sweethearts. I suppose some like to play with the rock and dance with their fancy gowns imitating the fun they see in the grey house. But me, well, they don't call me a dog for no reason. These bones done had their time. So don't you think I got a right to be idle every once in a while?
This place has seen many a sunset, enough to have learned the language of rise and fall, of ebb and flow, of death and rebirth, of bated breath. It stretches itself skyward from the earth, daring to reach for where it has been told it cannot touch, to be more than it has been told it could ever be worth. This rap line here can't roll cans. MC. Which was to say nothing living could make a home here, where the soil is a sea so fickle that roots slip through its fingers and fruit are a flight of fancy, where even grass cannot grasp enough to hold firm, where limestone skeleton pushes its way out from underground to surface, protruding like bones bent to break the epidermis, where there is life spread all around a multitude of bounds that do not leave space between them to breathe. This place has seen many a sunset, and yet the sun still rises to find sentinels standing in stubborn, sturdy branched guard to ward away the irreverent, standing in defiance, growing where they were told they couldn't, to halt any assault on the inhabitants of their earthen vaults. Well, if nothing can live here, then let us be the last place we rest we heads, our ancestors said. And 570 sunsets later, a subterranean legacy lives. This place has seen so many endings, gestated generations of spirits of living things within its womb, and created room for entombment to mean something other than extinction, to become the immaculate conception that makes survival into revival, restarting the cycle of remembrance, where every plant and person who ever breathed here becomes a part of our ongoing origin story. This place has seen so many fires raise its surface memories to cinders. It has learned how to don a carefully crafted mask while keeping its meaning intact. The tracks they walked are just as much ash as they are an archive of a submerged past. New trees, they are remnants of past Casarina's wisdoms. Reborn ancestors adorn the outskirts with foliage familiar to our forefathers. This place has learned how to exist beneath the radar, how to fight erasure from within the depths of it. It might be beautiful to look upon now, but when it bids you, come closer, and bare feet become bound to the ground beneath them. The mounds make a disquiet, disturbing your equilibrium, setting your mind off kilter, filling you with questions it will refuse to answer, will make you search to find the explanation for yourself. How does this tree grow fruit when its roots rest in shallow soil? How has it managed to find the foods to feed its leaves and limbs and others too? And how many, interred within, hold up the tombs, making mounds that roll and roil the earth on backs and shoulders bent by toil? How many of them are my own kin? And why do the limestone outcrops with their multitude of tiny holes crawl across my skin like the stony gaze of 1,000 eyes, searching, all as if to say something is here, even though you have been given the idea that it cannot be. Something demanding your reverence, your respect, your respite, as if to say this place has been and will forever be alive.
skeletal remains. The buried enslaved woman, girl, man, boy. I see buried hopes. I see buried dreams. I see buried songs. Your cultural amnesia allows you to erase everything my ancestral memory whispers to my soul. I see buried doctors. I see buried traders. I see buried priests. You build your fancy shrine and wave at the tourists to come by. The forgotten bones of my ancestors mixed into the concrete. Their black bodies, their bloody tears, build your political repertoire. The voices of my people muted then and to the end. Not allowed on your white consecrated ground, but I take the 6-foot plunge into my past to hear their stories, to ask them about the distance from home, through hell, to arrive safely at hell. Bodies stacked on each other in the ground, coins on the ice to keep them down. Hardly any names are known. Long buried, these teachers, these seamstresses, these newborns. A wooden box was a stroke of luck, dug up by some white man to interpret for me what I already hear so very clearly. When I hear the strike of whips, the clang of chains, the final breath of freedom, the only peace for the enslaved.
Why this woman tongue door hush door? How come it feel like the thing won't stop blowing?
Two of them don't know that silence more than them days so too outspoken. Always carrying on a conversation. Always got something to say.
They got a time and a place for everything. But no matter how you keep trying to tell them keep quiet, the two of them just keep on yapping.
But what it is the two of them could really got to talk about? What I never know branches and breeze could got so much more? Wait, what's that? Listen.
We come to tell all the stories that was get lost in silence. Stories about victory and stories about violence. We come to balance the scales by detailing details that too many try hard to forget. That too many get trained not to remember. Remember, they've got more to be passed than the middle passage, and the lies that we pass it more than massa and massive money manipulation, more than just the plantation. We just talk non-stop because we need to be forgotten. Because sometimes that thing named silence does only be disguised as old. And underneath the glitter of glory, it is turned out to be slow poison, cutting up the tongues to make sure we don't be the ones who just get to tell the story apart we come from. This silence can sneak in to sever ancestral ties and smudge bloodlines drawn over sand and cross seas. We speak, and it does be a revolution, a continuation of generations of riot and rebellion. We speak not because we are spoken to, but because we are not. We speak especially where people have refused to hear us being spoken of, for the ones who found peace in their graves and the ones who took their freedom above ground. We speak above as they do below. We speak because it's high time to cease ignorance and start being known. This fluency in forgetting is soon to be forgotten. So we just talk non-stop because we refuse to let ourselves get rendered dumb. And if you were smart, you would lessen noise and pay more attention. This window wafting to whisper sweet nothings is a cold voice cutting quiet to call goosebumps to your skin's surface, disrupting your disremembrance, reconditioning your reconditioning. This wind ain't overblown with idle rams. It is ingrained with indigenous wisdom to purify your consciousness and inundate your lungs with the oxygen of your origins. Reminder that ignorance for me ain't bliss, it is sin. marveling that we talk spoken. Was that you've been told to stay outside so long you unlearn the power of looking within. These branches is merely fruit, but in knowledge, you'll find the truth.
Never know branches and breeze could cost so much more though.
Here we good so we could surface this submarine unity. Listen, 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 listen,
It is now my pleasure to introduce the director of the Barbados Museum Historical Society, who will be the chairperson for this evening's lecture. This is the museum's 90th year, and we have come a very, very long way with regard to the development of public awareness with regards to the heritage, history, and culture of Barbados. Tomorrow is International Museums Day, so I think it fitting that tonight is the night that your lecture series is. Sounds? Thank you, Kay, for that welcome. And indeed, as is stated, protocols observed. But welcome, friends, welcome, family, welcome, colleagues, welcome, collaborators. Tonight we are singularly blessed to have amongst us our former president of the Council of Barbados Museum Historical Society, Michael, whose work and vision established this theatre that you are enjoying tonight. So I'd like you to celebrate him as part of our 90th anniversary celebrations. Is actually the 30th anniversary of UNESCO's Roots of the Enslaved Peoples Resistance, Liberty and Heritage Program. We have amongst us our colleague Didier, who was foremost in helping to establish that program at UNESCO. So as we celebrate both this 30th anniversary and the 90th anniversary of the museum, we want to take special account of the Newton Development Subcommittee's thinking and ideas around the need to explain and further broaden the development of knowledge about the importance of Newton, and to create a program of lectures, seminars, and in-person tours over the next 6 months to help raise public awareness of the significance of this enslaved burial ground at Newton. Particularly, the Newton Subcommittee has been advising since its inception on August 1st, 2020, Emancipation Day here in Barbados, that there needed to be broadened strategies for the development, interpretation, and promotion of this archaeological site, not just for Newton, but as a kind of standard bearer for the kind of work we need to do beyond Newton, beyond even Barbados, to the Caribbean, and to connect with our historic past, but also to connect with our future. So in that respect, it's my pleasure to invite you to listen to my colleague and friend, Kevin Farmer, who is the Deputy Director of the Barbados Museum. And I don't think I really want to read his bio to you because it's in the program. But I just wanted to say a few words. He has been the core collaborator and part of the vision of what and how we need to seek to achieve through Newton and, in fact, Cosrington College, which is his other remit. And in his work as both an archaeologist, a historian, and, what would I say, a spoken word advocate, he has sought to ensure that we find many different ways, archaeology, archival history, continue the work of is through Kevin's enthusiasm, direction and support as what we would call the site manager of Newton, to bring this story to life. So, without any further ado, we're going to now hear Newton, the story of Newton through his lecture, basically archaeology at the center. And we will now invite him to talk to you about exploring the 21st century legacy of the enslaved burial ground at Newton. So Kevin, over to you.
Thank you, Alexander, for those kind words. Good night to you, Sir Trevor, especially invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, and those of you who are actually online as this presentation is being streamed. Welcome to Centering Archaeology. I know I'm not supposed to move around too much because of the fixed position of the camera. I have to get accustomed to that. But I want to take you on a journey about where we would like to see the enslaved burial ground at Newton go, what it means to us as Barbadians, what it means to us as members of the diaspora, because it is a almost singularly unique site that requires the engagement of all communities in ensuring that the multiple narratives which it holds and embodies actually comes to light. So far, for the presentations today, we've kind of located where Newton is. You've seen it on the screen. It's, as far as we know it today, roughly 3 acres, 1.5 which were given to the museum in the 1990s through the intervention of Sir Trevor and others. But we'll go and discuss how much larger it is than we thought it was, and how much larger still it possibly is, and what does this mean in terms of site management. Incidentally, the museum was opened to the public 90 years ago, well, yes, 89 years ago, on the 8th of May in these buildings. So I think that's also interesting. Just a bit about the museum. We have over 500,000 objects, which for a museum isn't too bad. But 2 of the larger objects which we have are the buildings in which we're in, but the enslaved burial ground at Newton. Now, from the inception of this museum and historical society, it concerned itself with what they refer to as systematic researches regarding the Aboriginal Indian occupation of Barbados. That's early archaeology, or at that time very early antiquarianism, which evolved over time. This is 1933, taken from one of the first journals of the museum, reporting on the activity of the society. And of course, they were interested in windmills at that time, and commissioned works looking into fortifications. That evolved over time, leading, of course, in the 1960s to the museum being one of the founding members of what is the International Association for Caribbean Archaeology. The museum has held at least 3 IACAs in Barbados since 1967, the most recent being in 2019. And at that time, we posited the theme, which was re-examining self-Caribbean archaeology in the 21st century, where we challenged archaeologists to critically look at their discipline, to be reflexive in that review. And it's part of that thinking and review that informs where we are now in the discussion around the centering of archaeology. Archaeology is not Indiana Jones. It is sexy as he makes it look, and he's not an archaeologist. I remember teaching some students, and they want to say, "Oh, so you have a whip?" No, I do not. Archaeology is a destructive science that seeks to reconstruct through the examination of material culture, zoological and biological specimens, how man utilized past landscapes, what did we leave behind. So it's really, glorifying looking at someone else's garbage, but oh, how wonderful it can be. And there are many interesting things that you can find out about people. But it is in line with the 2019 IATA conference that we are here today. It was to move away from the chronological and thematic and asking to be more inter and multidisciplinary, and to not be stuck in that very tight, narrow toolbox that archaeologists use. Although historical archaeologists will tell you their toolbox is as wide as their imagination is. And there are one or two of them in the crowd tonight who will tell you, yes, we do try to borrow other people's methodology. Sometimes we borrow other people in order to examine and arrive at how human beings would have dealt with and encountered the past. And of course, how does that then reflect and help us to understand our present? So when we talk about the island of Barbados, which incident is, in case you didn't know, is not in the Caribbean. We're stuck out in the middle of the Atlantic. We like to think of all by ourselves, but no man is an island nor are we. And we've not been that for some 5,000 plus years. When we look at historic archaeology on the island, our contribution to the pre-Columbian world with early inhabitation around 2000 BCE, or there's something especially that back at this time, led by colleagues like Scott Fitzpatrick, building on work from the late Peter Druid. The unique material culture at that time is the way in which we utilize tools on this island, because there's no hard rock. It's a limestone island. So there's no hard rock. Persons utilize what they had and use innovation and imagination. And then you do that massive jump to the encounter and conquest that happened on this island in the 1630s, with the incursion of European settlement, early frontier society, developing and trying to find new ways of survival. Anyway, so I say stumbling across sugar, and in it, bringing about a collision of two cultures. That which was freed, those who were transshipped and kidnapped and sold into enslavement on this island to produce king sugar, and how that completely dominated this island within a decade. The 1640s to the 1650s is a sugar revolution in Barbados. Frontier homesteads and farmsteads are replaced by large plantations. And in the Barbadian context, a large plantation is anywhere from 100 to 300 acres. Utilizing a new plant, a new South Asian grass that was growing in South America, in Pernambuco, Pacific, that is then brought to this island by those Sephardic Jews who are leaving Spanish-controlled Portuguese settlements, because the King of Spain becomes the King of Portugal and asks people to convert, they leave. But they bring with them not only the nascent technology of how to produce sugar, but the trade and shipping networks and the ability to have capital to allow this new crop to grow. So what happens in the space of 10 years is, botanically, this entire island is transformed. Most of its natural vegetation is stripped, almost bare, and you have the introduction of new species.
I like to remind people, for those of us who grew up on Star Trek, the idea of terraformation is real. Welcome to Barbados. With the exception of few indigenous trees and shrubs, the majority of what you see on this island has been transplanted, imported, and brought here over the last 400 years, including people. And it is this that we're getting into. By 1660, the Newton plantation has been created. It's roughly 300 to 400 acres. At any one time, it would have held 300 enslaved people on the plantation. And incidentally, the owners of Newton also owned Sewell Plantation, where many of you flew into Barbados a couple of days ago. Sewell was a cotton plantation. So again, we think of Barbados with sugar, but alongside sugar, there was cotton being grown as well, and Sewell was that cotton plantation. What is important about this site is that it occasioned this. By the end of the 17th century, Bridgetown is the second largest port city in the British Americas. The only other port city larger than Bridgetown is Boston. I'll let that sink in for a bit. The only other port city larger was Boston. So understand how sugar had transformed this rather small frontier space in less than a decade, so that by the end of the 17th century, it's in fact the richest spot of land for the English in the Americas. So that's sinking a bit. But it therefore means that that is occasioned by the utilization of trafficked and enslaved African labor to make this happen. And what we're seeing here is a wonderful panoramic view from what was at that time Government House, which is now Government Hill, looking towards the city of Bridgetown. This is what is now St. Michael's Cathedral. I'm looking for the synagogue. Yeah. The Jewish synagogue, St. Mary's Church, which are all still standing. So it's a wonderful historical document, but it speaks to how quickly the town developed, and the ships in the bay speaks to that trade. So it's not only simply a transshipment point, it is also an entrepot. In the 17th century, with the Royal African Company, who had its barboons at the pierhead, enslaved Africans were brought here, some sold in Barbados, but then transshipped not only to islands in the Caribbean, but to places along South American mainland. And when you look at the originating trade in furniture and books coming out of Europe, this is the place where they land first and then onwards. And because of this, you've got various ship technologies being developed. You've got early creations of ship chandleries and foundries, so as to repair these ships, both on their voyage across the Atlantic into the Caribbean, and then the reverse voyage from the Caribbean into the wider Atlantic world, not only Europe, but Africa as well. And in this is Newton. A plantation which is very much caught up in international trade, in this new commodity, which is both sugar and rubber, allowing for its early owners, the Lanes, at a certain point to relocate back to the UK to enjoy the spoils of their plantation. Now, within that plantation, there is a burial space. All plantations have burial spaces. Why is it that up to today we've only ever uncovered a singular site, and that singular site being Newton? Is because at emancipation in 1838, there's almost a systematic erasure of enslaved spaces on this island. Enslaved villages are returned into sugarcane, the newly freed are literally thrown off the plantation. Their enslaved burial grounds in most instances are also placed back into cane. The uniqueness of Newton, because it is what Barbadians will call a sour grass field, very thin soil, lots of limestone crops, it's simply couldn't be turned back into sugar. It would not have been sustainable, and it was simply left to lie fallow. In the 1970s, the burgeoning discipline of archaeology and plantation archaeology, two American researchers come to Barbados, Dr. Jerome Handler and Dr. Frederick Lang, and they begin to look for and have a better understanding of what were these plantation systems looking like. And according to oral history accounts from Dr. Handler, it's at the visit to Newton in locating an elderly gentleman and asking the question, well, do you know of any burial grounds? He recounts the story of a grandparent informing him that somewhere out in one of the cane fields is where his ancestors were buried. And he was right. The importance of oral history, the importance of archiving such oral history. And now, it's also a matter of circumstance, and many archaeologists will tell you sometimes there's a bit of luck necessary in your research. And that bit of luck on that day was locating that gentleman who informed them of the existence of this burial ground. Now, what we didn't know at the time, what they didn't know at the time, is the importance of it. Because this is the first time that you've located a burial ground that is communal to the plantation. In the region, there are other burial spaces, but they're shared in between plantations. This is one specific to that plantation, which means that with the plantation record, you've got the historical documentation, and now you have the possibility of examining the material culture and the biological evidence to begin to have a more holistic story of how people lived, how they died, what were the religious practices being observed, what were the commemorations being observed, and of course, what is being buried with people. Now, the important thing to note, of course, that archaeology cannot tell you that a space or a person was enslaved. For that, you need historical documentation. It can only take you so far, but what it does is to add another layer of information to what the historical documentation may omit. And as was said earlier by Michelle when she wrote the poem, the story is written by the victim. What archaeology allows us to do is to find the information and to add it on so that we have the story from the other side. Likewise, so do the hidden voids in the historical documentation also allow us to piece together and ask those important questions of those persons who were not empowered to leave their own story. The picture on your left is one of the few extant photographs of that early excavation in the 1970s. Those of you who will venture up to Newton on Monday will recognize the landscape has totally changed because every few years there's a cane fire and it jumps over onto that enslaved ground and whatever is there is wiped out. So these mild trees were displaced by fire and have been replaced by what are mother-in-law town, a type of mimosi, part of the tamarind tree family, and a few other trees, as well as that sour grass patch. But every 5 to 6 years, there's a fire which totally transforms the vegetation on that landscape. But what remains intact is, in fact, enslaved burials. And in fact, what also happens with some of these fires, they show you different methods of burial. So for a very long time, it was thought most of the enslaved burials at Newton were in mounds. With the fires, we've actually uncovered, or have been uncovered, those burials that were not mounded. And in one instance, there is an outline of rocks that actually resemble what you would call a family plot. There's even a space that you might think, oh, that is where perhaps there might have been a door as entryway into that space. But it's higher up on the sloping pasture, and it would never be seen on a normal time like this because the vegetation simply obscures it. Oh, and my shameless plug, simply because one of the editors is in the audience. 2019 publication on pre-colonial and post-contact archaeology in Barbados, which is perhaps the most comprehensive overview and anthology of archaeology on this island over the last 60 years. So I know Niall's somewhere there, and I'll shake my hand at him and others. So Niall and Scott, and Mikey, Dan Armstrong, Matt Riley were the editors of this volume. The enslaved burial ground at Newton. Now in 2006, the museum began to have discussions what we want to see at Newton. We talked about further interpretation, the building out of the museum. That kind of coalesced in 2019 with the establishment of the subcommittee for the enslaved burial ground. But before I go there, I want to touch on one or two objects. This carnelian bead, which has been written extensively on by Dr. Handler, for me embodies globalization. This bead, which comes from Cambay in India, is brought across the Atlantic to Barbados, and it finds itself being interred into the burial shaft of a deceased enslaved African man who was brought to this island to grow, reap, and produce a South Asian grass called sugar. That is globalization. We need to understand that nexus of why we're here and the importance of that site. And for me, it is embodied in that bead. Another interesting embodiment is what is believed to be an African-inspired, not sure if African-developed pipe that was also found in one of the burial shafts. But what these artifacts did at the time was to explode the mythology that enslaved people had nothing. And what subsequent historical research and archaeological research has uncovered is that they did. They sought to create some form of normalcy in what would be an abnormal situation. And part of that is about the accumulation of material culture. As I pointed out, you've got managers' reports where enslaved people simply walked off the plantation. They understood in a way their limited power within a system that sought to oppress and suppress through terror, but recognize, you need my labor, and I need to exert some form of agency. And some of that agency is seen in the collection and trade and accumulation of material culture. Some of it is seen in running away. Some of it is seen in active physical manifestation and revolt. But at all times, there was resistance. And it is seen in the archaeological record in different ways. And this is one of them. So 2019, how do we seek to center archaeology as a discipline to ensure that it brings on board elements of co-creation, to borrow a museum term? How do we get the community involved not simply as a participant, but as active agent in what we're doing? Well, first, you need to invite them. You need to ask questions and you need to listen. Really hard things for archaeologists and curators to do. The assumption is, oh, but we know. We know nothing. We need to listen. And part of that listening is seen here in the photo top left. This is a ceremony held where we invited traditional African practitioners, members of the Muslim faith, members of the Anglican clergy, to come together to have a ceremony asking the ancestors for guidance, but asking the communities to work with us towards interpretation. And one would ask, but why someone who's Muslim? Because when we take a look at, say, Voyages to Horror, the work done by Lovejoy and Hal, we recognize that at the particular point in time when persons are being transshipped from West Africa to Barbados, many of those communities were in fact practicing Islam. And again, when we say West Africa, sometimes it seems so small, but it's not. It's north from Senegambia all the way south to the Congo. And of course, we still can't quite work out how far inland does it go. And that's only on the Atlantic side. Eastern Africa is a different ballgame altogether. But we're simply interested in what's happening on the western side of Africa. And in this, the recognition that there needed to be further interpretation of the site. So when we go on Monday, you'll see some of the interpretive panels, all are not in, but some are there to tell that story and tell the multiple stories of the site. But what was interesting by bringing that community is the ideas generated and the stories told. And we've done this on 2 other occasions. What we need to do next is to ask the question and try to reconstruct where the Newton tenantry disappeared to. Most plantations after emancipation created tenantries, utilizing the sharecropping system that was practiced in the southern United States. There's something called the Masters and Servants Act that's introduced into Barbados, which more or less ties the newly freed to the plantation and it's sharecropping. They use a wonderful French term, métissage. The English are wonderful. They love to use these terms. When you come to Barbados and you're looking for a slave auction, you're not going to see that word popping up. They're going to be using the French term for sale, which has now gone completely out of my head. It'll come back to me. But you'll see that in newspapers. You'll never see slave auction. You'll see the French term for sale. Vendu, thank you. There's a vendu. Oh, that seems nice. It's not. Vendu is a really cryptic way of saying we have enslaved people for sale. It's never done in a public auction. It's done within the precincts of a home. Some houses would have had an interior courtyard open to the elements. That's where it happened. So the scenes that we see from illustrated lithographs and papers coming out of the southern United States, that is not the reality in a space like Barbados. It's completely different. But when you look at those historical records, you'll see the word vendu. And that is exactly what they're speaking about. They're speaking about an enslaved object. So, as such for this site, you're getting people asking the questions of where are these ancestors to be found. So the next element for us is to sit with stakeholders and begin to do that public consultation to see if there's anyone alive who remembers where that tenantry is. And in the conversation the last 2 weeks, I've heard mention of someone who said, yes, there was a tenantry, but in fact there was a particular name given to a village just not too far away from the burial ground. So we're trying to track down those people and see what additional information we can have. But But that is about for me, the human element in centering the archaeology. We need to move beyond, we understand what the science tell us, the historical documents tell us. How can we now utilize that information to bring community and engagement, both for memory, but memorialization. And now when we get into memorialization, then it gets a lot more interesting, because it really literally can be asked, who speaks for the dead? Now, in the last 2 years, remember we said that the museum had acquired an acre and a half. In the last 2 years, we had approached the landowner and asked, well, we don't own all of the field, but we would like your permission to do geophysical survey of the remainder of the field, because we believe that enslaved burials are located there, and if they are, will you gift that to the museum? They agreed to do the geophys, and they agreed that they will gift it to us. Dr. Brad Writing and folks at Geoscan based in Canada then set about doing the geophysical survey. And what you see here, both in the yellow and red, are in fact the burial shafts at Newton. And they correspond to what Dr. Handler and Lange believe were the amount of interred people in space. They believe 570 people. We've located 570 burial shafts, which is a very difficult thing to do in a landscape that is limestone, because they are literally digging into the limestone and using the limestone as backfill. So it's a combination of ground penetrating radar and electronic magnetometry that allows us to see those subtle differences, and they're very subtle, to indicate that this is in fact a burial shaft. But we do believe that potentially somewhere up here on the ridge and in this area here, there might be potential burials. So we're hoping in the future to conduct additional geophys in that area. And when we visit the site on Monday, over in this area, which is off of this shot, is where the enslaved village would have been located. So we have a sense of the spatial layout. The enslaved village is not too far away from where the enslaved burial ground is. But what we have not yet figured out is what is the delimit of that enslaved burial space. And that becomes important as with the government of Barbados, there is a project on its way called Reclaiming Our Atlantic Destiny, part of which will be a building out of a memorial at the enslaved burial ground, but also the development of other institutions to aid in the building out of a wider heritage district on the lands of this plantation, because it still is a plantation. So this is what is envisioned artistically by Ajayi and Associates. Large circular mound on that ridge line overlooking the burial ground, which is down here, topped with 570 wooden steels taken from different areas in the world, both places of embarkation and disembarkation related to transatlantic slave trade. Connected to that is a domed interpretive center linked by a causeway, which is ramped to be rising above the burial ground as you walk into that space. And because we have now located the burial shafts, we do also plan to place markers on those burial shafts made of local clay and numbered, where persons can use virtual reality to get additional information of those burials that we have that information on. We've also placed a moratorium on any further excavation on the site because we believe that the work that has been done and some of the skeletal remains which are still with us can answer these additional questions, and there's no longer any significant need to continue any further physical excavation into the site. Again, that's part of the site management of the site as well. Because 100 years from now, there may be some entirely new technology that allows us to find out completely different things without having to excavate. And as such, we should leave it there. But also, we need to have further discussion with the community. And that's going to be interesting about what should happen at the site. Right, so just some shots showing what the causeway would look like walking up to the memorial, the internal dimensions of that interpretive center. And at the time, he envisioned further away from the ground, the building out of this heritage district. But I'm not saying that this is in stone, but this was the initial vision. But it's good to have something to look at and to recognize what it is we're looking at. Because from the ridge line, you're looking south towards the small town of Enslaved, where it is believed a lot of the sugar that would be grown on this plantation would have been shipped to ports in Europe, and where perhaps also some of the enslaved people who were interred at this site would themselves have been walked over the hill to the plantation in the 17th century, 17th and 18th century. So again, the centering of archaeology for me is not only site-specific, but landscape centered, which is in fact one of the things that needs to happen in carbon archaeology. For too long we have been preoccupied by trying to understand the site or a specific feature in the site, and we've not taken that slightly. Let's take a step back. Let's understand what it is that landscape is trying to tell us, and how do we set about preserving that landscape in order to tell these stories. Because the landscape then allows us to tell the pre-colonial, the contact, the colonial, and post-emancipation. And now that we've become a republic, post-republic as well. So we need not to be so deeply tied and fixated on features and our sites, but we need to take a broader look at the landscape. How do we get there? A kind of a roadmap in a way, quite broadly, is we need to explore and understand what the best practices are, engage with the stakeholders, recognize that some of them don't only live in Barbados, but live outside of Barbados, but have a connection. And we really need to arrive at different modalities of how we engage in order then to set up the policies that allows for good site management and good insight interpretation, and how to make that sustainable. Because that is never critical now. Because in all of this so far, we've centered the archaeology around the material culture, what we've learned from the biological, and the site. Great. All fieldwork needs to be funded. How do we get that done? And those are some of the questions that we need to ask and engage with stakeholders on. And within that, the continued want and expression of decoloniality. For many people, this is a new thing. I will make the argument that West Indies have been engaged in decoloniality from the beginning, of seeking to center themselves within this space and asking questions about who we are and how do we express that. Whether it is C.L.R. James or Edward Glisson or even some of our own Flexonians. And how do we center that discussion beyond decoloniality with what we're trying to achieve at the enslaved burial ground becomes quite important. So that is where we are at this time. And of course, the questions that we must always be asking at every turn: who gets to speak for the past? What's the capacity that we need in order to make this happen? How do we provide training? How do we do methodologies? And I use the example of St. Eustatius, which for me is an example of what you don't do when you're seeking to center archaeology. You don't leave it up to the archaeologists to make the decisions. They've got to center their research into the community, where the community response and the community needs drive their research. And if it is that the community needs don't necessarily gel with their research, then they need to take a step back and ask, I wonder why. Is it that they don't know what we're doing, or we're simply doing it wrong? Or more importantly, they might know something that we don't know, and we need to listen. The hard things. But this is necessary if the centering of archaeology in this instance is about democratization and engagement that ensures long-term sustainability and education interpretation of the site. This map everyone knows, because ultimately, and this is one of the ultimate things for all of us who are site managers engaged, how then does your site play into the larger discussion around this particular system of being? And the enslaved burial ground at Newton forms part of the next nomination for Barbados's World Heritage. It is part of a serial nomination combining 5 other sites on island to tell the story of sugar and rum. And you can't tell the story of sugar and rum without telling the story of the enslaved. And this particular site, because of its unique nature, speaks directly to those persons, their internment practices, their living habitations that you can't find anywhere else, not only on this island, but are hard to pinpoint in this region and are harder to pinpoint in this hemisphere. That is the uniqueness of this site. And then its connections to other sites on island, because again, it's part of a system. This is simply a map showing the towers created after the 1860 rebellion, so as to alert the authorities of if there was ever another revolt. So we've got these on island, but we've got very few sites that speak directly to those persons who were involved in the labor and the innovation. So think of it this way. The largest number of enslaved people are to be found on plantations. The largest number of enslaved owners are to be found in the urban sector. I can find buildings where enslaved owners live. I can find very few places where enslaved persons lived and were buried. And that is something that we do need to redress in what we're also doing here in terms of central archaeology. How do we uncover where the other enslaved burial sites are on this island? Screwed off in the city, again, those descendants of the enslaved who would end up working as engineers and working in the ship's foundry in such a space, again, that is part of that wider legacy of what happens in the post-emancipation world. shots of Bridgetown, which I think some of you are going on a walking tour of tomorrow. But who are our stakeholders? There are residents, there are NGOs, there's government, business owners, children, people who are simply seen as consumers, some visitors and tourists. They're all your stakeholders, and they have to be directly involved in how you are seeking to manage and interpret the space. And we engage in a number of ways. Tours, town hall meetings, although they're becoming quite ubiquitous, but they're important. But we have to go and meet people where they are, not necessarily hope that they will come to us. How do we empower our young people to be engaged with their history? In some instances, we don't teach it in a way that makes it engaging. We don't teach it in a way that makes it actually present, and therefore part of their everyday life. I think that's critically important, and clearly it's neglected. And the recognition to our policymakers that the potential within what we call the heritage sector is, yes, direct heritage tourism, but the creation and restoration of not only firms, but persons who might be skilled in the restoration of burial spaces. And that exists, but not on this island. The creation of digital tours, partnerships with companies and institutions. So recognize that there is a revenue earning potential that can only happen if this particular discipline and its activity is centered in a co-creative manner. And I use the photo of everyone, well, not everyone, but in Seoul, main airport, you can literally walk into one of the stores and recreate a form of Korean art because they revere and teach their intangible culture. So part of the intangible nature of enslavement, we need to do the same thing with. We need to revere it. We need to uplift it. And we need to ensure that its education is amplified, not only for ourselves, but for those who come to visit. Underpinning all of this is the necessity of legislation. These are the myriad bits of legislation on the island that helps us to safeguard archaeological heritage. There still is not one comprehensive, robust piece of legislation that allows us to safeguard both our terrestrial and maritime archaeology. And that, for me, needs to be addressed sooner rather than later, given the amount of development happening on island. Policy to incentivize legislation to protect education, community engagement, funding, and the cross-pollination of ideas, whether they be design or otherwise. And I'm going to skip because I know I'm getting close to the end. We've been sitting for quite a while. But the building out of the cultural resource management system is necessary. The development of trail systems, whether in the urban or rural environment, also allows us that kind of education, but also preservation of sites and landscapes. We don't ever want to do that. Everyone remembers what Rio Tinto did in Australia by totally destroying a sacred site, even though the law said that they could. There's a difference between what is legal and what is moral. And if we educate people, then perhaps this wouldn't happen again. The way forward for us is democratizing decisions for planning development, provide people to engage and nominate sites within their own landscape within a system for preservation, and creation of heritage clubs in each parish so that the people themselves are and see themselves as the co-owners of this heritage. And I think that is where we need to go. And that we must have that legislation that allows us to protect the historic landscape and not simply individual sites or interesting artifacts, so that we understand the complexity of what we're looking at, so it tells a more holistic story of who we are as a people. Centering archaeology for me is key for the development and safeguarding of landscapes and the telling of both the intangible and tangible heritage of our island. And without it, we are destined to not know our history and repeat some horrible mistakes we rather not ever repeat. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, I know that it's been a little while, but I don't think there was anything that you found uninteresting in what Kevin presented. We'd now like to offer a few minutes for any major questions or comments that people would like to offer. Yes, Rick.
I'm interested. So one second.
Wait a minute, the microphone is coming to you. Yeah.
Is this working?
Oh,
Good, this is working.
go ahead,
Thank
Rick.
you.
Go ahead. Yeah, I'm interested in the story of the architecture that you showed. It's, can you tell a little bit about that? And I was interested in how you described it, first of all, as never just being about archaeology itself, but it's being related, relates to the place it is, the land it's on,
Yeah.
the surround. And it's an interesting combination of architectural forms, actually. Some of it quite organic, some of it not.
Yes.
And I'm just curious what sits behind it.
Well, anyway, the most I can say about that is that really is the brainchild of Sir David Ajay and his architectural firm. But the recognition that when he comes to Barbados, what has been transshipped and transplanted over 400 years, and borrowing on what are the architectural techniques utilized in West Africa, some of which you find in the early development of architecture here, in using what were dog in the creation of local homes, and then seeking to marry those two in a way that allows for reverence and respect and elevation. And I think that's what we see in those drawings, which is firmed in at the time. And I'm really hoping that they come to fruition. The color itself is also an interesting one. You immediately think of West Africa because of the red clay, but guess what? We have similar red clay in certain spaces on this island. So in St. George Valley, and parts of St. Thomas and St. Andrew, you have terracotta red soil that easily represents the same type of adobe and terracotta architecture in West Africa. And so it's also a very visual reminder of that we are African. And I say that, but 30 years ago, you said that to a Barbadian, it would have been a fight. But again, that is a legacy of colonization. The legacy, as Fanan said, of black skin and white hands, deeply ingrained, because enslavement, to enslave the people that control them, you have to deeply ingrain in the psyche a certain level of inferiority that can only then be combated by education and almost a re-education as to who you are and what is possible.
Thanks. And the next question. Any others?
Oh, someone may.
Kevin, thanks very much for that fantastic presentation. It was absolutely incredible. And I'm speaking just as a simple engineer who always appreciate these archaeological details. But this one,
Anyone who knows the speaker knows that's not true.
but biggest challenge I see, I'm not sure if you thought about it, how are you going to convince Barbadians at large that this is important and we need to embrace this information?
I dare say education, education, education. And part of that education has to be that we've got a story that is absolutely phenomenal. That we as a people are innovators and survivors. It's not to look at enslavement as victim, but to look at enslavement as survivors and the modalities that people created in order to survive that experience. Across the board, to me, is the most important thing. And to recognize that as a people, as we come out of that, all things are achievable. Look at what we've been able to achieve thus far. When you say that anywhere you go in the world, you'll find a Barbadian, it's a true story. I'll add to that. Next time you look in the sky and you see the moon, there's a crater on the moon named after a Barbadian. All things are possible. But it lies with education. And it lies with a de-education as well. And part of that has to be that you are capable of anything. And this history that we think is shameful or in the past is not shameful, and past is present. We just live in a different country now, to paraphrase that wonderful point.
Thank you. We have time for one more question, so please.
Yes, it's not specifically about Newton, and you had said that there are existing other burial sites. Is there any need to have those recognized or to discover those? And what information or what actions being done for some sites that we hear of, I think it's at Spearhead and at Carlisle.
Okay. All right, so two questions. At present, I know of an ongoing archaeological research, same GPR being used at a site near Archaeology College to try to locate an enslaved burial ground in that area. And there's going to be ongoing research because oral history of the community is that there are two other places where they believe their ancestral burials. So what we want to utilize is the technology to go and do the investigation to see if we can locate them. That's one. Now once we've located them, not even once we've located them, in consultation with the community, once we've located them, that's them, what do you want to do? And it's then guided by the community, knowing what they want to do, that we can then approach central government about how do we safeguard these particular spaces. Because when you look at the physical development plan of Barbados, there is the ability to designate archaeological or conservation heritage areas. We now have to test the policy. And testing the policy is where NGOs like the museum engage with communities, speak to government agencies to see what is possible. As it relates to the other thing you mentioned, within the PDP as a policy document, different agencies are asked about particular potentials of archaeological or historic or architectural in certain areas. We make recommendations to the town planner. In Barbados right now, the museum in certain areas will make recommendations of what is called watching brief to the town planner for those areas where we believe there's a potential of an archaeological resource. But all of that hinges on the Town Planning Act because there is no robust single piece of archaeological
And the
legislation.
creation of the preservation of antiquities.
Right. In order to have a antiquities legislation, although for some people that's a bad word, but it's a necessary thing. Because if you don't preserve what is yours, then what stories are you telling your people? How are we supposed to self-actualize and self-identify? How do we find innovation? And I use this as a simple thing. I think in Southern Africa a couple of years ago, the guys had found an old recipe for beer out of an archaeological site, and they turned around and recreated it, and guess what? It's selling now. So centering archaeology can also bring money close again. But all of these things are important to coalesce into preservation, what is possible in the present day, and how we learn, and in some cases then how we make revenue. I've got two countries that I can think of that a major foreign exchange earner for them is culture, well, three: UK, Italy, and France. And all of it, 80% of it hinges on the center of archaeology building out of that 100%.
We have one last question. Please. We are all waiting.
Thank you. No, I just want to.
Barbados has been very present and engaged in breaking the silence on the history of slavery and the invisibility of the victim. So proud of it. Now I would like to add two developments which are now emerging and Barbados should be strong up, because the slave system is a global system. So it's important to link what is being done here with what is being done in the region and worldwide in my country, Senegal, and other parts. We are working on that, and this sounds excellent. But another point is important also because the material dimension of slavery is being shown archaeology, but the ideology of legitimation of slavery, which is namely racism, is profoundly marking the present day world. So it's highly important that the work we are doing is a result of your work and this museum. I mean, very fundamental multicultural dimension of Barbados. Take it as one of the steps to build up more strongly the multicultural dimension of the sharing what is being done.
Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Yes.
I'm almost tempted to say that the project manager for Road is here. But I know later on in our lecture series, she will be on one of our panels to really firmly deal with what you just said. It's just not the centering, but the explosion of and the recognition that this is an ongoing fight, because we are combating 500 plus years of a particular system. Until you call it out at every turn and seek redress and repair, then we're going to be always caught in that cycle. But I think we're at that stage now where there's enough global momentum. And you always recognize that you're doing good work when people all of a sudden say that you're talking nonsense and you should forget about the past. That is when you know that you're hitting the right nail. But in understanding that, framing it within then a larger context, because enslavement is one thing. The bondment and movement of other persons of other ethnicities, whether it's indentureship for Irish and Scots, or indentureship for East Indians and Asians, or you go to the Indian Ocean and you talk about the Indian slave trade for Mauritius and others. We've got to confront it as the same part of that global system. And it is about greed and hegemony and racialization across all levels. We must do all that we can to continually come back and to recognize that until we dismantle the system, it is going to continue to perpetuate it.
Thank you
And
very
I want to
much.
say the audience for the work on the Slave Road project.
Oh yes, okay. Thank you very much, Kevin, for those answers and for very engaging and thought-provoking talk. I don't want to call it an lecture, I think it was a fitting opening of the doors to let us look through and beyond and to see what else, the many, many different aspects, not just to the site, but the site stands as a symbol of many other sites, both in Barbados and in the Caribbean, so see it that way. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure bringing this now to an end to invite you to join us on May 30th for the next lecture by Dr. Tara Innes, which is called History at the Core, and she may dispute Kevin about archaeology with the sense of history at the core. Another engaging lecture in the offing. Please be here with us at 6 p.m. or online. And I would want to make reference to those of you who are interested, not so much in the lectures, but you want to visit and want to understand, to please join us for the intervening tours of Newton, which are being organized. The first one for the general public on May 20th at 9 a.m. So please make sure that you have signed up, registered your interest because bookings will close fast. Finally, I also want to take this moment to mention the fact, as raised at the very beginning, that Barbados will be looking forward to celebrating with you International Museums Day and receiving notification of the International Museums Day program tomorrow afternoon in Bridgetown. Please join us for that. And at the end of this, I just want to thank the University of the West Indies, many, many different aspects of the University of the West Indies, some of which you saw on display. Our History and Philosophy department is our partner in the annual lecture series, but you also bore witness to the wonderful presentations coming out of the Creative Arts Center. That whole film production was the result of the director, Yvonne Beats, working with her students. And these are all students who produced the film, who produced the performance, who conceptualized the whole idea of video production, who created songs, who created poems, and then executed them. I think you can see how Newton, thank you, yeah, I think you can see how a site like Newton can be the inspiration for other creative endeavors. So please enjoy, and thank you for being with us, and I look forward to seeing you next time on May 30th. Thank you very much.